ever wish you could? Like, just hit a button and suddenly, boom, you've got next-level brain power.
Right. Like you're unstoppable. Master of focus, memory, tough decisions, the whole package.
Exactly. Well, get this, we might actually have that button already. It's called the prefrontal cortex.
It's true, and it's kind of wild when you think about it. Most of us, we're just going about our life totally unaware of this mental powerhouse we're carrying around.
She's like, we've got this superpower, but we skipped the tutorial, right?
Exactly.
And that's where today's deep dive comes in.
We're going deep, and I mean deep, into the science of the prefrontal cortex. Think of it like the CEO of your brain.
I like that, the CEO.
Because understanding how this part of our brain works can be a complete game changer. And to guide us on this journey, we've got the incredible neuroscientist Marynês Pereira. Her research is seriously eye-opening.
It really is.
But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's start with the basics. What exactly are we talking about when we say prefrontal cortex, and why should we care so much about it? Okay, so picture this. The front part of your brain, right behind your forehead.
Got it.
That's where your prefrontal cortex is.
Yeah.
And get this, it takes up a whopping 25% of your entire brain.
25%.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yep. Prime real estate up there, which tells you just how important it is.
Wow. Okay, so 25% of our brain dedicated to what exactly? What makes the prefrontal cortex so crucial to, just getting through the day?
Well, think about what makes you you. Things like planning your day, making sense of a complicated article you're reading, or even resisting that donut when you're trying to eat healthy.
Ooh, yeah. Tell me about it.
All of that, that's your prefrontal cortex, hard at work. It's responsible for all those higher-level thinking skills that we honestly probably take for granted way too often.
Okay, so it's the CEO, the decision maker, the one calling the shots. It's starting to make sense why understanding this part of our brain could be such a game changer.
Exactly. And here's another fascinating thing on the evolutionary timeline. The prefrontal cortex, it's relatively new.
Really?
Yeah, it's like the latest software update for our brains.
So we're all walking around with cutting-edge brain tech. That's pretty cool.
You are. You are.
But how do we actually use this to our advantage?
That's the million-dollar question, right? Well, Pereira, she breaks it down into 5 key superpowers. Understanding, deciding, searching, memory, memorization, and focus. It's like your brain's executive functions. And each of these, you can actually learn how to optimize them.
Superpowers and optimization. Now you're speaking my language. Let's unpack those superpowers, starting with understanding. Seems pretty basic, but I have a feeling there's a lot more to it than we realize.
Oh, absolutely. Pereira, she points out that understanding, it's not just passively absorbing information like a sponge. It's about actively engaging with it, processing it, making it meaningful.
And I bet I know what plays a starring role in that process.
Go on.
Our good friend, the prefrontal cortex.
You got it. It's the driving force, taking that raw data from the world around us and turning it into something we can actually use. Whether you're reading a book, listening to this podcast, or even just watching something happening, your prefrontal cortex is working behind the scenes, helping you make sense of it all.
So we've got this amazing ability to really understand information, thanks to our prefrontal cortex. But understanding, that's only part of the picture, right? I mean, what about when we need to make a decision?
Decision making. That's where the prefrontal cortex really shines. It's like the ultimate decision-making machine.
Yeah, listening.
Every choice you make, big or small, it all gets filtered to the prefrontal cortex.
So it's calling the shots all day long. But then how come some days I feel like I can make a million decisions, no problem, and other days, even choosing what to have for breakfast feels impossible?
You're hitting on something really important there. The prefrontal cortex, as powerful as it is, it's not invincible.
What do you mean?
Remember we talked about it being the newest part of our brain, evolutionarily?
Right, yeah.
Well, it's also incredibly energy hungry.
Interesting. So you're saying our brain power, it's like a finite resource. There's only so much to go around.
That's exactly it. And this is where Pereira's research gets really fascinating. She highlights the importance of glucose, which is our brain's primary fuel source. It's crucial for keeping our prefrontal cortex running smoothly.
Wait a minute, are you telling me there's a scientific reason I turn into a different person when I'm hungry?
You got it. Think about it. When your blood sugar's low, your prefrontal cortex, it's literally running low on fuel.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Like a car can't run without gas, our brains don't function at their best without glucose.
So if I'm feeling mentally drained, maybe a healthy snack is a better solution than just trying to push through.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
And that brings us to another one of those superpowers. Pereira talks about memory search. It's
Yeah.
like your brain has this built-in search engine like Google, sifting through your memories to find what you need.
Okay, I like that analogy. So when I'm trying to remember where I put my keys, that's my mental Google search engine doing its thing.
Precisely. But here's the thing. Just like any search engine, your brain's search function, it can get bogged down, especially if it's overloaded or not optimized.
Yeah, it's definitely harder to remember things when you're stressed out.
Exactly. That's your prefrontal cortex struggling to keep up. Which is why Pereira's research on memorization is so important. It's like the superpower we all wish we had more of, the ability to learn new things quickly and effectively.
Right. So how can we get better at it? What does her research say about boosting our memorization skills?
Well, this is where things get really interesting. One of Pereira's key findings is that our brains, they're not designed to hold on to massive amounts of information all at once.
Really?
In fact, we can only hold on to about 4 simple pieces of information at a time.
Wait, only 4?
Yeah, it's not much, is it?
That doesn't seem like a lot to work with.
Which is why trying to remember everything in our heads is a recipe for disaster.
Hmm.
We need a different strategy, and Pereira suggests externalization.
Externalization, huh? What's that all about?
Basically, it's about taking information out of our brains and putting it somewhere else we can access it. Think lists, notes, voice recordings, anything that gets those thoughts out of your head and into a system.
So instead of trying to remember everything, we free up mental space by using tools and systems. It's like giving our brains an assistant.
Exactly. And by doing that, we're not only reducing the strain on our prefrontal cortex, but we're also creating a much more reliable system for remembering information later on.
Okay, that makes sense. It's a win-win. This is amazing. It's like we've been running our brains on outdated software this whole time.
It really is like an upgrade, isn't it?
Totally. So we've covered understanding, deciding, memory search, memorization, but there's one more superpower to unpack: focus.
Ah, yes.
And in this world of distractions, I feel like that's the superpower we all need a little more of.
Oh, absolutely. In this always-on, hyper-connected world, focus has become so incredibly valuable. But the good news is your prefrontal cortex is directly involved in your ability to focus. And Pereira offers some really practical insights on how to actually strengthen it.
Okay, so how do we harness that prefrontal cortex power to fight distractions and actually get stuff done?
Well, it starts with remembering what we talked about earlier, that the prefrontal cortex needs fuel.
Right, right. A hangry brain is not a focused brain.
Exactly. So, nutrient-rich foods, hydration. Treat your brain like the high-performance machine it is.
Makes sense. But what about the distractions themselves? How can we create an environment where it's easier to focus?
This is where Pereira's research on prioritization comes in. She suggests tackling your most mentally demanding tasks earlier in the day.
So instead of trying to power through when I'm already fried, I should be scheduling those tough tasks for the morning.
You got it. Willpower and focus, they're like muscles. They tend to be at their strongest earlier in the day.
Okay, I can see that.
So if you can schedule your most challenging tasks for when your prefrontal cortex is primed and ready, you're setting yourself up for success.
This is all starting to make so much sense. But what about those times when you're facing a really complex decision? It feels like focus is huge there too, right?
Absolutely. And Pereira, she actually offers this really helpful 4-step process for those tricky decisions. And it all starts with simplification.
Simplification. I like where this is going already. Tell me more.
Basically, you break the problem down into smaller, more manageable pieces. So instead of getting overwhelmed by the big picture, you identify, say, 3 or 4 key factors.
Right.
And remember, the prefrontal cortex, it loves those smaller chunks.
It's like that saying, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time?
Exactly. And once you've got those manageable pieces, Pereira, she's a big believer in the power of visuals.
Oh, yeah.
Colors, diagrams, mind maps, they can help your brain process information so much faster.
I'm a very visual learner. For me, if I can see it, I can understand it.
And you're not alone. Our brains are wired to process visual information much faster than just plain text.
Interesting. Okay, so we've got simplify and visualize. What are the final 2 steps?
The next one is grouping similarities. So once you've got those visual chunks of information, you start looking for patterns, connections.
Okay.
It helps you see the bigger picture more clearly.
It's like putting together a puzzle. You start with all these individual pieces, and then as you group similar colors, patterns, the full image starts to emerge.
Exactly. And then finally, Pereira suggests prioritizing those more complex decisions, especially when it comes to your to-do list.
So even within our decision-making, we're still leveraging that peak prefrontal cortex power by getting the tough stuff out of the way first.
Exactly. It might seem counterintuitive, but by tackling those brain-draining decisions early on, you free up mental energy for the rest of your day.
This has been incredible. We've gone deep into the science of the prefrontal cortex, explored its superpowers, and most importantly, we've learned how we can actually use this knowledge to improve our lives.
And the most exciting part is that this is just the beginning. There's so much more to discover about the brain and its incredible potential.
It's empowering to realize we have more control over our brain power than we might think.
Absolutely. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought from Pereira's work. Understanding your prefrontal cortex, it isn't about becoming some kind of productivity machine or always making the perfect decision. It's about recognizing that you have this incredibly powerful tool, and by learning to use it effectively, you can create a life that's more focused, more fulfilling, and ultimately more meaningful.
That's a great point. It's about working with our brains, not against them. Well, there you have it. The secret to unlocking your superhuman potential lies within your very own prefrontal cortex. Until next time, keep those minds sharp and those prefrontal cortexes fueled.